The human fleet is in chaos. Space around Earth is filled with the wreckage of destroyed ships, burning cities, and the echo of human cries for help. The Zrixian forces have launched an all-out assault on Earth, and humanity's defenses are failing. Space stations that once provided shelter to survivors now float in ruin, struck down by alien weapons of mass destruction. Earth's cities, once bustling centers of innovation and culture, now lie in flames. Every attempt to fight back has ended in defeat, and the human resistance is scattered and demoralized. The enemy, with their advanced technology and unmatched power, is too strong. The once proud human race is now on the verge of extinction. In the midst of this nightmare, Captain Aiden Holt stands as humanity's last hope. A young yet brilliant strategist, Aiden had been chosen to lead the final counteroffensive against the Zrixians. But now, as he looks out at the destruction, even he doesn't know where to begin. He's lost everything: his family, his friends, his comrades. And now, Earth itself is crumbling under the weight of an invasion it cannot withstand. Aiden stands on the bridge of a battered flagship, staring into the darkness of space. His face is hardened with the pain of loss, yet there's a fire in his eyes, a glimmer of determination that refuses to die. He's the last leader of humanity's defense, but even he feels the weight of desperation. The Zrixians have crushed their forces on every front, and Earth's remaining fleet is barely holding together. Time is running out, and soon there will be nothing left to fight for. But then, just as all hope seems lost, something unexpected happens. A mysterious signal is intercepted. It's faint at first, a series of jumbled coordinates mixed with static. But there's a pattern, something human in the message. The signal contains the location of a hidden weapon, something that hasn't been seen in centuries. The abyssal worms. These ancient creatures, according to legend, were once the ultimate weapon of an ancient civilization, one capable of wiping out entire armies with ease. They were thought to be extinct, buried beneath the sands of a desert planet known as Kazareth. Could these creatures be the key to turning the tide of war? Could they be the weapon humanity desperately needs to defeat the Zrixians? Aiden doesn't know, but he's left with no other choice but to investigate. The message could be a trap, or it could be the answer they've been searching for. Whatever it is, Aiden knows he must act quickly. The Zrixians are closing in, and Earth's survival depends on finding a way to fight back. The coordinates lead to Xerath, a planet long considered hostile and lifeless. Few have ever ventured there, and fewer still have returned. But Aiden has no time to waste. The hope of humanity rests on this one mission. He gathers his most trusted team, soldiers, engineers, and scientists, and prepares for a journey into the unknown. The ship prepares for launch as Aiden briefs his crew. His voice is steady, but inside, his heart races. He can feel the weight of every life that depends on this mission. As the countdown begins, a quiet tension fills the air. The crew, though weary from battle, knows this could be their final mission. But they have no choice. This is humanity's last chance. As they leave Earth's atmosphere, the crew looks back at the burning planet. It's a painful sight, but it also strengthens their resolve. They know they may never return, but they also know that they must try. The abyssal worms, if they exist, could be the key to humanity's survival. The journey to Xerath is treacherous. The planet is a hostile, barren desert world, filled with ancient ruins and dangers from a forgotten age. The team's ship makes its way through the galaxy, and the closer they get to Xerath, the more the tension builds. Every minute feels like an eternity. Aiden sits alone in his quarters, staring at a holographic map of Xerath. The coordinates lead to a location deep beneath the surface of the planet, where the abyssal worms are rumored to be buried. As the ship enters Xerath's orbit, Aiden and his crew prepare for the worst. They've heard the stories of ancient weapons, of creatures so powerful that no army could stand against them. But they've also heard the warnings of explorers who have ventured to Xerath and never returned. The planet is known for its fierce storms, its sandstorms that can tear apart ships in seconds, and its deadly creatures, many of which are unknown to modern science. This will be a mission unlike any other, a mission that may not leave them alive to tell the tale. But for Aiden, there's no other option. The fate of humanity rests on this gamble. As they descend into the planet's atmosphere, he makes a silent promise to himself. He will not let humanity be extinguished without a fight. Whatever dangers lie ahead, he will face them with everything he has. The crew touches down on Xerath, and the harsh desert landscape stretches out before them. The air is thick with dust, and the ground seems to vibrate with the echoes of something ancient, something powerful. Aiden leads his team down into the depths of Xerath, where the coordinates lead them to the entrance of an underground labyrinth, a forgotten tomb, buried for centuries. As they enter the cave system, the tension is palpable. The walls are covered with ancient symbols, and the further they venture, the more they realize that they are not alone. The abyssal worms, once thought to be myth, may be closer than they think. Aiden's mind races with the possibilities. If the creatures are real, and if they can be controlled, they could change the course of the war. But what if they are too dangerous, too uncontrollable? What if they can't tame them? The stakes have never been higher. As the team moves deeper into the cave, the suspense builds. Every footstep feels like a countdown to the unknown. The first sign of the abyssal worms appears, a faint rumble in the ground beneath them. The earth trembles, and the sound of something massive moving through the tunnels reaches their ears. The hunt has begun. The team is about to face the most dangerous challenge of their lives, and Aiden knows that this mission could either save humanity or destroy them all. The council chamber was filled with tension. Leaders from every corner of Earth gathered in a desperate attempt to find a solution to the ongoing Xerxian invasion. They had no answers, no new strategies, just a grim recognition of their impending defeat. The city outside was burning. The skies darkened with the smoke of destruction. Yet in this room, there was one last hope, a gamble that might turn the tide. Aiden Holt stood before the council, his voice unwavering despite the weight of the moment. He had heard all the excuses, all the reasons why they should give up. He had seen the same faces filled with fear and doubt, but he had also seen something they didn't, an opportunity, a spark of hope in the form of the abyssal worms. "This is it," Aiden said, his eyes scanning the room, trying to connect with every leader. "The Xerxians are closing in. Our fleets are scattered, and our cities are falling. But we have one chance left, a way to fight back. If the stories are true, if the abyssal worms really exist and can be controlled, they could be our weapon. They could change everything." The room fell silent. Aiden knew the risks. He knew how dangerous it would be to send a team to a planet like Xerath. The desert world was unpredictable, filled with ancient traps and deadly creatures. And the idea of taming the giant, ancient worms seemed like a fantasy. But in this moment, there was no choice but to take the gamble. After what seemed like an eternity, the council voted. The decision was made. Aiden would lead the mission to Xerath. There was no turning back now. Preparations began immediately. Aiden and his team were given the best equipment humanity had left: advanced weapons, cloaking devices, and drones for scouting. But despite the technology at their disposal, the mission was still a gamble. No one knew what awaited them on Xerath, and the risk was massive. Even if they managed to locate the worms, there was no guarantee they could tame them. And if they couldn't, the mission could very well end in disaster. Aiden gathered his team, all of whom had been chosen for their skill and experience. There was Dr. Lena West, an expert in ancient technology. She had spent her life studying the lost civilizations and their forgotten weapons, and her knowledge would be crucial in deciphering the mysteries of Xerath. Alongside her was Sergeant Marcus Chen, a veteran soldier with years of combat experience. Marcus had seen the worst of the war and was known for his calm in the most dangerous situations. Then there was Dr. Amelia Graves, a scientist specializing in biochemistry. Her research had made her the leading expert in alien creatures, and her expertise would be key in understanding the abyssal worms. Along with them were a handful of elite soldiers, each chosen for their bravery and combat skills. They were a diverse group: engineers, medics, and soldiers, all bound by one common goal: survival. The journey to Xerath was long and fraught with danger. As the crew traveled through the vast expanse of space, the tension only grew. They all knew that this could be a one-way trip, and no one was under any illusion about the risks they were taking. Aiden spent much of the time in quiet reflection, staring out into the void of space. He couldn't shake the thought of the consequences. What if they failed? What if the worms weren't there? Or worse, what if they couldn't control them? The fate of humanity was resting on their shoulders, and the weight of that responsibility was beginning to feel heavier than ever. As the ship entered the atmosphere of Xerath, the harsh desert landscape came into view. From space, the planet looked like nothing more than a dry, barren wasteland. But Aiden knew better. Beneath the surface of Xerath, buried deep within the ancient ruins, was the potential to turn the tide of the war. He couldn't afford to let fear or doubt stop him now. The team landed in a remote area on the edge of the desert, far from any known Trixian outposts. The air was thick with dust, and the ground beneath their boots felt like it could crumble at any moment. The planet's atmosphere was thin, making every breath feel heavier than it should. But the team was prepared for the harsh conditions. Aiden led the way, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. The wind howled through the desert, carrying with it the smell of ancient decay. As they ventured deeper into the desolate landscape, the team's excitement grew. They were on the edge of discovering something that could save humanity. But little did they know, their journey was about to take a dark turn. As they approached a set of ancient ruins, the ground beneath them trembled. At first, it was subtle, a faint vibration, like something deep beneath the surface moving. But then, the rumble grew louder, more intense. The team froze, their weapons drawn, as the earth seemed to come alive. Without warning, a group of alien figures emerged from the sand, their dark forms barely visible in the swirling dust. These were no ordinary Xerixians. They were scouts, silent and deadly, sent ahead to track the movements of any who dared enter the planet. They had known about the abyssal worms long before humanity had. The Xerixians had already been searching for the ancient creatures, hoping to harness their power for themselves. The ambush was swift. The scouts were armed with advanced weaponry and moved with a precision that left no room for hesitation. The humans fought back fiercely, but the Xerixians were relentless. Aiden barked orders, guiding his team through the attack, trying to keep them alive long enough to escape the desert. As the battle raged on, Aiden's heart pounded in his chest. The Xerixians were no longer just an enemy. They were a force that had already infiltrated their last hope. It wasn't just about reaching the worms anymore. It was about surviving long enough to find them. The mission had just become even more dangerous, and Aiden realized that they weren't just fighting to tame the worms. They were fighting to survive on Xerath. After a tense standoff, the Xerixians retreated, disappearing back into the desert sands as quickly as they had appeared. The team was left shaken but alive. The encounter had revealed a chilling truth. The Xerixians had known about the abyssal worms all along. They weren't just hunting humanity, they were hunting the creatures for themselves. As the team regrouped and pressed forward, Aiden's mind raced. The Xerixians weren't just trying to conquer Earth, they were after the same weapon they were. But now, more than ever, Aiden knew that there was no turning back. The mission was not just about hope anymore. It was a race against time. Whoever found the abyssal worms first would control the fate of the galaxy. The gamble was on, and the stakes had never been higher. The council meeting room was cold, filled with tension. Leaders from all over Earth sat in a circle, their faces filled with exhaustion and fear. The planet was on the brink of total destruction. The Zrixians, a technologically superior alien race, had launched a full-scale invasion, and humanity was losing ground fast. Cities were burning, fleets were being obliterated in space, and the remaining human resistance was scattered and demoralized. Earth's future seemed uncertain, and the Council was at a loss. Captain Aidan Holt, standing before the Council, felt the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. His eyes were tired, his body worn from the constant battle, but his resolve was unwavering. In the face of humanity's darkest hour, Aidan had a plan, a dangerous, risky plan, but the only plan that might give them a chance. "Listen to me," Aidan said, his voice steady despite the grim situation. "I know the risks, but if the stories are true, if the abyssal worms still exist, they are our only chance. These creatures were once weapons of a forgotten civilization, capable of wiping out entire armies. If we can find them, if we can tame them, we have a chance to fight back." The room fell silent. Some of the council members exchanged skeptical looks. The idea of sending a team to a desert planet like Exarath to find ancient creatures was insane, even for people desperate to hold on to any hope. But Aidan was firm, and the clock was ticking. "We have no other choice," he continued. "We're running out of time. The Zrixians are closing in, and Earth's defenses are collapsing. We need to act, and we need to act now. The abyssal worms are our last hope." After a long, tense silence, one of the council members, General Silva, stood. He was a hardened veteran of the war, and his voice was filled with doubt. "You're asking us to gamble everything on a legend. These creatures, if they even exist, have been buried for centuries. And you want us to send a team to a hostile planet that we know nothing about. What if it's a trap? What if we fail?" Aidan's eyes locked with General Silva's, and his voice was unwavering. "If we don't try, then we're already dead. This is our last chance. We've lost everything else. This is the only chance we have to turn the tide." After what felt like an eternity, the council members finally voted. The decision was made. Aidan would lead the mission to Exarath. The risk was enormous, but it was their only option. The team would go, and they would go as quickly as possible. Preparations began immediately. The team was assembled, each member chosen for their unique skills and experience. Aidan stood at the front, leading the group of the best soldiers, engineers, and scientists left on Earth. Their mission was clear: find and tame the abyssal worms before the Zrixians could get to them. Dr. Lena West, an expert in ancient technology, was one of the key members of the team. She had dedicated her life to studying the lost civilizations that once roamed the galaxy, and her knowledge of forgotten weapons and technology would be crucial in deciphering the secrets of Exarath. Alongside her was Sergeant Marcus Chen, a battle-hardened veteran who had seen the horrors of war firsthand. His calm demeanor and tactical genius had earned him the respect of every soldier under his command. If anyone could keep the team alive in the heart of an unknown desert planet, it was Marcus. Dr. Amelia Graves, the leading biochemist and expert in alien life forms, was also part of the team. Her knowledge of alien creatures would be critical when it came to understanding the abyssal worms and, hopefully, learning how to tame them. The rest of the team included elite soldiers, engineers, and medics, all prepared for the most dangerous mission any of them had ever faced. They knew the risks. They knew they might not make it back. But they also knew that Earth's survival depended on them. As the ship prepared for launch, Aidan looked out over the vast expanse of space. The mission was a gamble. If they succeeded, they could change the course of the war. But if they failed, it would mean the end of humanity. There was no room for failure. He couldn't afford to let them down. The journey to Exarath was long, and the tension aboard the ship grew with every passing hour. As they entered Exarath's orbit, the planet came into view, a barren, lifeless world, covered in swirling dust and sandstorms. The ship's sensors barely registered anything on the surface. It was as if the planet itself was trying to hide its secrets. Upon landing, the team donned their suits and gathered their equipment. The air was thin, and the temperature on the surface was unbearable. Xerath was a desert planet, its surface covered in ancient ruins and the remnants of a civilization long gone. The crew's mission was simple: find the abyssal worms, and if they existed, tame them. But things quickly took a turn for the worse. As the team moved deeper into the desert, the ground began to tremble beneath their feet. At first, they thought it was an aftershock from the ship's landing. But then the tremors grew stronger. Suddenly, the sand around them erupted as a group of alien figures emerged from the dunes. They were fast, silent, and deadly. These were no ordinary Zrixians. They were scouts. Zrixian soldiers sent to monitor the planet and keep others away from the ancient weapons buried beneath the sands. The Zrixians had known about the abyssal worms long before humanity had. The ambush was sudden, and the team barely had time to react. Aiden shouted orders as they took cover behind the ancient ruins. The Zrixian scouts were armed with advanced weaponry, their weapons powerful enough to tear through the human armor in seconds. The battle was fierce, but the humans fought back with everything they had. In the midst of the chaos, Aiden realized the horrifying truth. The Zrixians were hunting the worms, just as they were. The Zrixians weren't just after Earth's destruction. They were after the power of the abyssal worms, and they wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who got in their way. The fight continued for what felt like hours. One by one, the Zrixians were pushed back, but the cost was high. Some of the team had been injured, and the air was thick with the smell of burning sand and the sound of weapons firing. But the Zrixians retreated, disappearing back into the desert as quickly as they had come. As the team regrouped, Aiden's mind raced. The Zrixians were already here, hunting the very creatures they were after. The mission had just become much more dangerous. The stakes had never been higher. Whoever found the abyssal worms first would have the power to control the future of the galaxy. The team was shaken, but they knew there was no turning back. They had to find the worms before the Zrixians did, or Earth would fall. And so they pressed on into the desert, knowing that each step brought them closer to a dangerous, uncertain future. The desert seemed endless. As Aiden and his team pressed forward, the sun overhead blazed relentlessly, casting a harsh, suffocating heat across the landscape. For hours, they had navigated through the barren wasteland, their supplies dwindling, their spirits fading. Every step felt heavier, the weight of their mission bearing down on them. They had no choice but to keep going. The abyssal worms were their last hope. As they ventured deeper into the ancient ruins on Xerath, the atmosphere grew tense. The walls of the ruins were covered in strange markings, symbols from a time long lost. Dr. Lena West scanned the walls carefully, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "These markings," she said, "they're ancient warnings. It's telling us that the creatures down below are not just weapons. They're alive, and they're dangerous." Aiden nodded grimly. "That's what we're here for. We need to tame them before the Zrixians do. But we need to find them first." The team continued on, their path lit only by the faint glow of their torches. As they moved deeper into the ruins, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around them. It was as though the planet itself was holding its breath. They knew they were close. The maps they had found indicated that the underground cave system, where the abyssal worms were said to be hidden, lay just ahead. The ground suddenly trembled beneath their feet. It wasn't an aftershock this time. It was something far more ominous. The tremors grew stronger, and the team had to steady themselves to avoid falling. The ruins were shaking, their ancient foundations groaning under the pressure of something massive moving beneath them. Aiden's heart raced as he motioned for the team to stop. "Something's down there," he said, his voice barely a whisper. They all looked at each other, fear creeping into their minds. But they had come too far to turn back now. The trembling continued until, with a deafening roar, the ground before them split open. sending chunks of sand and stone flying into the air. The team staggered back, their weapons drawn, ready for anything. From the depths of the chasm, a gargantuan creature emerged. It was like nothing they had ever seen before, a massive, segmented body, covered in thick, armored scales. Its eyes were glowing with an eerie, menacing light, and its mouth opened to reveal endless rows of razor-sharp teeth, each one bigger than a human. The abyssal worm. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The sheer size of the creature was enough to make anyone's blood run cold. It was a true monster, the living nightmare from the depths of Xerath's long-forgotten past. The worm hissed, its massive body coiling as it rose from the depths of the cave. Aiden felt his heart skip a beat as he realized that they were staring at the very thing they had come here to find. Before they could react, the creature lunged forward with terrifying speed. Its massive jaws snapped shut just inches from Dr. Graves, who had barely managed to dodge out of the way. The ground beneath them cracked and shifted as the worm lashed out again, nearly crushing Sergeant Marcus Chen under its massive weight. The team scrambled to avoid the creature's attacks, but it was everywhere at once, a living tidal wave of destruction. Aiden's mind raced. He knew they couldn't kill the worm. This wasn't a battle they could win with brute force. But if they didn't do something quickly, they would all be dead. Without hesitation, Aiden activated the cloaking device, a small but powerful piece of tech that could make them temporarily invisible to the creature. The device hummed to life, and the team vanished from sight, their bodies becoming transparent against the desert landscape. The worm paused, its massive head swiveling, trying to sense their movements. It hissed angrily, thrashing through the ruins, but the team remained hidden, breathing a collective sigh of relief. For a moment, they had survived. But Aiden knew that the cloaking device wouldn't last long, and they couldn't rely on it forever. They needed a plan, and they needed it now. As the creature continued to search for them, Aiden thought back to everything they had learned about the abyssal worms. Ancient records left behind by long-lost human explorers have described these creatures as intelligent, almost sentient. They were more than just weapons. They were alive, with their own behaviors and instincts. If they were going to survive, they needed to understand these creatures, and fast. Aiden turned to Dr. Lena West, who was already scouring her data pad for anything useful. "Lena, do you have anything in the records that could help us understand how to control the worm? Any clues on its behavior?" Dr. West nodded. "There's a record of ancient humans who were able to communicate with the worms. They didn't tame them in the way we'd think, but they were able to influence their movements using sound. These creatures are highly sensitive to vibrations, especially in the low-frequency range. The ancient humans used that to guide them." Aiden's mind was spinning. He glanced at his team, then back at the massive creature, still thrashing through the ruins in search of them. The sound. He needed to find a way to use it to their advantage. As they remained hidden, Aiden quickly formulated a plan. He instructed Dr. Graves to prepare a device that could emit low-frequency vibrations, similar to the sounds described in the ancient records. They didn't have much time before the cloaking device wore off, and the worm would find them again. But if they could use the vibrations to attract the worm, perhaps they could control its movements long enough to tame it. The team set to work, their hands shaking with fear and adrenaline. As Dr. Graves completed the device, Aiden took a deep breath and activated it. A low, resonating hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground. The abyssal worm froze, its massive body swaying slightly as it seemed to listen, drawn to the sound. Aiden's heart raced as he watched the worm slowly move toward them, responding to the vibrations. The creature's massive head turned in their direction, its glowing eyes locking onto the team. Aiden felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. This was their chance. As the worm inched closer, Aiden could feel a strange connection forming. It was as if the creature understood the vibrations, understood that they were offering something it had been missing. The bond between them deepened, and Aiden realized that this was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding a creature that had been hidden away for centuries. The abyssal worm was not just a weapon. It was a living being, capable of thought and emotion, and it was about to become humanity's last hope. But taming the beast would be harder than Aiden could ever imagine. The true challenge had just begun. The air in the cavern was thick with tension as Aiden stood before the abyssal worm, its massive, coiled form looming in the shadows. The vibrations from the device still hummed faintly through the ground, keeping the creature calm, for now. But Aiden knew that this fragile moment wouldn't last long. If they didn't act quickly, the Zrixians would find them, and the worm would become a weapon beyond their control. Aiden took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. His hand shook as he activated a small ancient device he had found in the ruins, one of the many pieces of technology scattered among the bones of a once great civilization. He knew the device was used for interfacing with the creatures, but he had no idea how it worked. There was little left of the ancient records to guide him, and most of the data he had found was encrypted or incomplete. But this was humanity's last hope. Failure was not an option. "Lena, help me with this," Aiden said, his voice tight with urgency. Dr. Lena West moved swiftly to his side, her fingers dancing over her datapad, pulling up the ancient translations she had been working on since they entered the ruins. "It's working, Aiden," Lena said, her voice filled with relief. "I've unlocked more of the ancient language. The device is responding." Aiden nodded, his focus entirely on the glowing interface that connected him to the worm's nervous system. He felt a strange pulse of energy as he activated the device, and for a moment, he thought he could feel the worm's presence in his mind. The connection was faint, like a distant whisper, but it was enough. The first few moments were disorienting. Aiden's mind was bombarded with images of the worm's vast, labyrinthine tunnels, a place where the creature had lived for centuries. He saw glimpses of its past, its instincts, and the brutal nature of its existence. The worm had been a weapon, bred for destruction, but it was not without its own code, its own set of rules. This creature wasn't just a mindless beast. It was sentient, capable of thought and reason. It had its own way of understanding the world, and that world had been shaped by survival. Aiden's heart raced. He realized that taming the worm wouldn't be as simple as controlling it with vibrations. He needed to understand it, to form a bond. The ancient records had spoken of this connection, but they had been vague about the process. It would require more than just technology. It would require empathy, patience, and a deep understanding of the creature's nature. The device hummed again, and Aiden flinched as a sudden surge of energy coursed through him. He gasped, his body shuddering with the intensity of the connection. The worm was resisting him. It was powerful, far stronger than any machine or weapon they had ever encountered. The pain was almost unbearable, but Aiden didn't back down. He pressed on, trying to break through the creature's defense, trying to reach its heart. "Stay with me, Aiden," Lena urged, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We're so close." Aiden's mind was spinning, but he focused on the task at hand. He had to make the worm understand that they weren't enemies. They were allies. The worm's instincts told it to destroy, to kill without hesitation. But Aiden knew there had to be more to it than that. It wasn't just a mindless predator. It was an intelligent being with its own sense of purpose. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Aiden felt a shift. The pain eased, and a wave of understanding washed over him. He had broken through. The worm's thoughts became clearer, its emotions more defined. It had recognized him, acknowledged him as something other than a threat. Aiden could feel its wariness, its distrust, but also its curiosity. The bond was fragile, but it was there. I think we're getting through," Aiden whispered, his voice hoarse from the strain. He looked up at Lena, his eyes wide with a mix of triumph and exhaustion. But their brief moment of success was cut short by a sudden, horrifying sound. A deep rumble shook the cavern, followed by the unmistakable whine of Zrixian engines. Aiden's heart sank as he turned toward the entrance of the cave. The Zrixians had found them. "We don't have much time," Aiden said, his voice urgent. "Lena, finish the translation. We need this worm to help us." Lena's fingers flew across her datapad as she worked to unlock the final pieces of the puzzle. The Zrixians were closing in fast, and the team had no choice but to prepare for a fight. The worm, still partially tamed, began to stir restlessly as it sensed the approaching danger. Aiden could feel its anxiety, its fear. It was a reflection of his own, but he couldn't let it take over. They had to work together. The ground trembled again, and the sound of Zrixian boots echoed through the cavern. Aiden's pulse quickened. The Zrixians would be here any minute. The team moved quickly to set up a defensive position, their weapons at the ready. The caverns were narrow, the stone walls craggy and uneven, giving them little room to maneuver. But they had no choice. As the first Zrixian soldiers appeared at the mouth of the cave, the team opened fire. The battle erupted in an instant, laser blasts ricocheting off the stone walls. Aiden's heart raced as he fought alongside his team, their every move desperate, every decision critical. The Zrixians were relentless, their weapons far superior to anything the humans had. But the team fought with everything they had. Aiden, his focus divided between the battle and the worm, continued to work to strengthen his connection with the creature. It was responding, but it was restless, its powerful instincts clashing with its new bond to Aiden. The worm's massive form shifted, its enormous body crashing against the walls of the cavern as it sensed the incoming threat. It wasn't fully under Aiden's control yet, but it was close. He could feel it. "Lena, we need more time." Aiden shouted over the chaos, but Lena was already ahead of him, pulling the final pieces of data together. "Just a few more seconds," she yelled back. The Zrixians closed in, their weapons trained on the team. The laser blasts filled the air, lighting up the dark cavern with flashes of blue and red. The team fought back with every ounce of energy they had, but they were outmatched. Then, with a deafening roar, the abyssal worm surged forward, its massive jaws snapping open. The ground beneath the Zrixians cracked as the creature barreled through the cavern, tearing through the stone like it was paper. Its sheer size and power sent Zrixians flying, their bodies crushed under its enormous weight. Aiden could feel the worm's anger, its rage at being cornered. But there was something else, something more than just mindless destruction. There was a sense of honor, of duty. The creature wasn't fighting just for survival. It was fighting to protect them, to honor the bond they had begun to form. The battle raged on, but the tide was turning. The worm, now fully unleashed, was tearing through the Zrixians with terrifying efficiency. It was a brutal, savage fight, but the worm's power was unmatched. The team watched in awe as the creature they had come to tame became their greatest weapon. In the midst of the chaos, Aiden realized the truth. The worm wasn't just a weapon, it was a partner. And together, they had a chance to win. The battle raged on, and the sound of laser fire and explosions echoed through the caverns. The Zrixians were relentless, their superior technology and tactics pushing the human team to the brink of collapse. Aiden and his team fought desperately, but every second that passed seemed to bring them closer to the edge of annihilation. The abyssal worm, now fully unleashed, was tearing through the Zrixian forces with terrifying strength. Its massive body crashed through the cavern, sending shockwaves that made the very walls tremble. But in the midst of the chaos, a chilling realization struck Aiden. The worm had become a force of nature, a weapon. And in the heat of the moment, it was no longer under his control. The bond they had forged was slipping away, unraveling like a fragile thread. The creature's instincts, wild and untamed, were once again in charge. Aiden could feel the disconnection growing, as if the worm was slipping further from his reach. Then the unthinkable happened. Bonner, one of Aiden's most trusted soldiers, stepped forward into the heart of the chaos. His eyes were cold, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Aiden thought nothing of it. There was too much happening. Too many threats to focus on any one person. But then, with a sickening clarity, Aiden saw it. Bonner wasn't attacking the Zrixians. He wasn't fighting at all. Instead, Bonner was working with them. Aiden's heart sank as he saw Bonner hand over crucial data to his Zrixian officer, a betrayal so deep it felt like a knife to the chest. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was deadly. Bonner had been feeding the Zrixians information all along, playing a double game. He had known about the worm, about their mission, and had been sabotaging their efforts from the inside. The team was horrified as Bonner's true allegiance became clear. The worm, sensing the treachery, went into a blind fury. It rampaged through the caverns, thrashing uncontrollably. The bond between Aiden and the creature shattered, and in the chaos, the once predictable beast became a deadly, unpredictable force. The Zrixians, now emboldened by Bonner's betrayal, seized the opportunity. They pushed forward with renewed vigor, knowing they had gained the upper hand. Aiden's breath caught in his throat as he watched the destruction unfold. His team, his friends, were being torn apart, both by the Zrixians and by the worm's uncontrollable rage. The cavern was a battlefield of flashing lights and debris, where survival seemed impossible. Desperation clawed at Aiden's chest. He was physically exhausted, drained from the mental strain of trying to control the worm, from the emotional weight of Bonner's betrayal. He could feel his resolve crumbling. The team was losing, and the worm was no longer an ally. It was an unstoppable force of destruction. But in that moment, when everything seemed lost, something deep within Aiden stirred. He remembered the bond he had started to form with the creature, the connection they had shared, however fragile. The worm had responded to his emotions before, had listened to his commands. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a way to reach it. If he could reconnect, even briefly, there might be a chance to turn the tide. Aiden closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos around him. He focused all his energy on the worm, on the bond they had formed. The connection had been strained, but it hadn't completely broken. He reached deep into his mind, letting his feelings of loss, anger, and desperation guide him. He felt the worm again, faintly at first, like a distant echo. It was still there, still responsive, but lost in its fury. He called to it, not with words, but with his heart. He let the worm feel his pain, his regret, his unwavering desire to save his team. He wasn't just trying to control it anymore. He was trying to reach it, to show the creature that they were on the same side, that it didn't have to destroy everything in its path. For a brief moment, the world around him seemed to fall silent. The screams of his team, the sound of weapons clashing, all faded into the background. Aiden's mind was fully focused on the worm, on their shared connection. And then, slowly, he felt it, a subtle shift. The worm's fury began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of calm. It was listening. It was responding. With renewed determination, Aiden opened his eyes. The battle wasn't over yet. The Zrixians were closing in, their weapons aimed directly at the team. The worm, now partially calmed, remained poised to strike. Aiden knew what he had to do. This was their last chance. He shouted over the noise of the battle, his voice raw with emotion. "We're not done yet." He turned to the team, his voice unwavering. "We need to get the worm to fight for us. Now." Lena, still trying to stabilize the data she had been working on, looked up at him. Her face was pale, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. "Aiden, are you sure? The worm is still unpredictable, if we push it too hard." "There's no time for second thoughts." Aiden interrupted, his voice fierce. "We either fight together, or we die. We have to risk everything." With that, he turned back to the worm. He reached out with his mind, commanding it to focus, to fight. The bond they had started to form was still fragile, but it was enough. He didn't need to control the worm completely. He just needed it to fight beside them for this last, desperate moment. The tension in the air was palpable. The Zrixians were closing in, their ships hovering just outside the cave entrance. The time for hesitation was gone. Aiden's heart pounded in his chest as he gave the command. Fight! The worm roared in response, its massive form surging forward. The ground trembled beneath them as the creature tore through the Zrixians with terrifying power. Lasers bounced off its armored hide as it bulldozed through the enemy ranks. It was a moment of pure chaos, an underground battle unlike anything the team had ever experienced. For a few moments, it seemed as if they might win. The worm's sheer power was enough to overwhelm the Zrixians, sending them scrambling for cover. The human team, reinvigorated by the creature's sudden onslaught, fought with everything they had. Their weapons fired in unison, and the Zrixians began to retreat. But Aiden knew that they couldn't keep this up forever. The worm's strength was immense, but its bond with Aiden was still fragile. The creature could only maintain its rampage for so long before it would break free again. This was their last hope. It was a desperate gamble, but it was all they had left. As the battle raged on, Aiden's heart was filled with both dread and hope. Would the worm fight for them until the end, or would they be consumed by the very creature they had tried to tame? The battle raged on, the air thick with the acrid scent of burnt metal and the deafening roar of weapons. Aiden stood at the heart of the chaos, his eyes fixed on the massive, writhing form of the abyssal worm, now fully under his control. The creature's power was unlike anything humanity had ever seen, and in that moment, Aiden knew this was their last stand. The Zrixian forces, though technologically advanced, had never encountered a threat like the worm. It was a weapon of unimaginable destruction, its sheer size and strength capable of tearing through entire fleets. Aiden, his bond with the creature now stronger than ever, guided it with precision, directing its wrath against the invading army. The worm's massive jaws snapped shut around entire ships, swallowing them whole. The Zrixian warships exploded into fiery debris as the worm's monstrous teeth crushed their hulls. Waves of shockwaves rippled through Xerath's surface, sending tremors that could be felt miles away. As the worm tore through the Zrixian forces, Aiden felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever experienced. For the first time since the beginning of the war, he felt like they might actually win. The Zrixians were on the defensive now, retreating before the unstoppable force that was the worm. But the battle was far from over. Aiden knew that the enemy would not surrender easily. They would fight to the bitter end. In the midst of the carnage, Aiden's mind was focused entirely on the worm, but he could still hear the sounds of the battle echoing around him. His team, the last line of defense for humanity, fought alongside the worm, their weapons flashing in the dim light of the cavern. Each soldier gave their all, determined to make sure humanity would not go down without a fight. The stakes were clear: survive or face extinction. But just as the tide seemed to turn in humanity's favor, disaster struck. Lena, the brilliant scientist who had helped Aiden connect with the worm in the first place, was at the forefront of the battle. She had been instrumental in the mission, deciphering ancient technologies and helping Aiden communicate with the creature. Now, as the worm rampaged through the Zrixian forces, Lena made a decision that would cost her everything. The Zrixians had set up a last line of defense, a heavily fortified command center deep within the caverns of Xerath. Aiden and his team knew that if they didn't destroy the command center, the Zrixians would be able to regroup and launch a counterattack. The worm, though incredibly powerful, needed to reach the heart of the Zrixian forces to ensure victory. Lena had a plan. She knew that the only way to ensure the worm could reach the command center was to destroy the Zrixians' heavy artillery that stood in their way. There was a hidden weak point in the enemy's defenses, and Lena had found it. But to get to it, she would need to cross the battlefield, risking her life to plant the charges that would cripple the enemy's position. Without hesitation, Lena made her move. As the worm tore through the Zrixians, she darted across the battlefield, weaving between blasts of laser fire and explosions. Aiden saw her go, his heart in his throat. He knew the risks, but Lena was determined. She reached the heart of the Zrixian artillery, planted the explosive charges, and activated them. The explosion that followed was deafening. The Zrixian defenses were torn apart in a blinding flash of light. The worm, sensing the change, surged forward, its path cleared. But in that moment of triumph, the victory came at a terrible cost. Lena was caught in the blast. Aiden's world seemed to stop as he watched the explosion consume her. The charges had done their job, but they had taken Lena with them. His heart twisted in agony as he realized the price of their survival. The worm, now fully unleashed and focused on the remaining Zrixian forces, continued its rampage, but Aiden could no longer feel the joy of victory. All he could feel was the deep, gnawing pain of loss. The team fought on, but it was clear that the emotional toll of Lena's death weighed heavily on them all. Aiden felt her absence like a hole in his chest. She had been more than just a team member. She had been a friend, a collaborator, someone who had believed in him even when he doubted himself. Her sacrifice had opened the way for humanity's final push, but it had also ripped a part of Aiden's soul away. But there was no time for mourning. As the worm tore through the Zrixian army, Aiden's grief became fuel for his determination. Lena's death would not be in vain. They had to win. For her. For all of humanity. Aiden tightened his grip on the worm's bond, commanding it with renewed strength. With every wave of destruction, Aiden could feel the worm's power surge within him. He pushed it harder than ever before, directing the creature's fury toward the Zrixian command center. The cavern trembled with each strike as the worm tore apart the enemy's last line of defense. The Zrixians, now broken and retreating, had no choice but to flee before the unstoppable force they had awakened. But even as the worm ripped through the last of the Zrixian forces, Aiden knew that the battle wasn't truly over. The war had claimed so much already. So many lives, so many sacrifices. Lena's death would forever haunt him, but it also gave him the strength to push forward. He couldn't afford to stop now. The worm was still their best hope, and with Lena's sacrifice, humanity had a fighting chance. The battle for Kereth had been long, brutal, and costly. But in the end, Aiden's strategy, combined with the terrifying power of the abyssal worm, had turned the tide. The Zrixian fleet, once a nearly invincible force, had been shattered. Ships that had once dominated space were now floating wrecks, destroyed by the worm's wrath and the human soldiers' unrelenting drive. Aiden had commanded the worm to strike with fury, and it had obeyed. The Zrixians had no choice but to retreat, their forces broken, their morale shattered. The victory was complete, but it came at a heavy cost. Aiden stood among the wreckage of the battlefield, the remnants of the Zrixian fleet scattered across the surface of Exarath. His heart felt heavy, not from the triumph, but from the weight of the sacrifices made. Lena's death, Bonner's betrayal, and the countless lives lost in the battle, all of them haunted him. The faces of his fallen comrades flashed before his eyes, and for a moment, he could only stand there, lost in his grief. But as the dust settled and the last remnants of the enemy forces vanished, Aiden knew that the victory was bittersweet. Humanity had won, but it had been at a cost that no one could fully measure. The war had changed them all. The remnants of the Zrixian forces scattered across the galaxy, retreating to their homeworlds. For the first time, humanity could breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that they had not only survived but had pushed back the tide of destruction. The battle for survival had been won, but the war had taken its toll. In the days that followed, the human forces began to reclaim the territories that had been lost. Cities that had once burned under the Zrixian assault were now being rebuilt, and humanity's flag flew once more over the desolate lands. The rebuilding process was slow, but the people of Earth were determined. They had faced an enemy more powerful than they could have ever imagined, and they had emerged victorious. The worm, now fully under Aiden's control, became a symbol of their resilience. As humanity took its first steps toward recovery, the worm was no longer seen as a weapon of destruction, but as a powerful ally. The creatures, once feared and thought to be mere monsters, had shown their true nature. Beneath their terrifying appearance was a deep intelligence, an ancient bond that could be forged through determination and mutual respect. The worm had saved humanity, and in doing so, it had become something more. A living testament to the power of courage, unity, and the belief that no enemy is truly invincible. Aiden's leadership was celebrated. He had led humanity through the darkest time in its history and had emerged victorious. His bond with the worm had been crucial, and it was a symbol of what could be achieved when the impossible was confronted head-on. But Aiden knew that this victory wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who had fought, to everyone who had sacrificed. The soldiers, the engineers, the scientists, each one had played a part in the triumph. They had faced the unknown, battled against a seemingly unstoppable enemy, and had come out on top. Years passed, and the story of the battle for Xerath became a legend. Aiden's name was remembered, not just for his tactical brilliance, but for his unshakable belief in humanity's ability to overcome the odds. His relationship with the worm became a model of what could be achieved through understanding and trust. The creature, now part of human history, roamed freely on the now reclaimed planet of Xerath, no longer a threat, but a powerful ally in humanity's future. And while the galaxy was still vast, with new challenges always on the horizon, humanity stood united, stronger than ever before. As Aiden stood on the horizon of a peaceful world, looking over the lush green landscape of Xerath, he couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. The world was at peace. The sky was clear. The worm, once a creature of destruction, now roamed freely in the distance, a symbol of the triumph of humanity's spirit. It was a world that Aiden had helped shape, a world where humanity had proven that no matter the challenge, no matter the enemy, they could rise to meet it. In the distance, the sun set on the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the planet. Aiden stood there, his gaze fixed on the horizon, thinking of all the lives that had been lost, of all the sacrifices made. The pain of losing his friends, his team, and Lena would never fade. But in that quiet moment, he found peace. They had won, not just because they had technology, not just because they had the worm, but because they had something the Zrixians didn't: hope. Humanity had faced the ultimate test, and they had passed. They had not only survived, but they had triumphed. The galaxy was theirs to rebuild, and Aiden knew that, no matter what came next, humanity would always find a way to overcome it. The final shot of the battle was over, but the story of humanity's resilience was just beginning. For the first time in years, Aiden allowed himself to smile. The worm, now at peace, continued its journey across the land. Humanity had won, not just through advanced technology, but through courage, sacrifice, and the belief that no enemy was invincible. The legacy of that victory would live on forever, and as the stars above twinkled like distant beacons, Aiden knew that humanity would always be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the last of the Zrixians were driven from Xerath, Aiden stood, his heart heavy with the weight of what had been lost. The worm, now tamed and bound to his will, roared in triumph. But Aiden couldn't share in its victory. Not yet. There was too much grief, too much pain. For now, all he could do was honor Lena's sacrifice and push forward, knowing that the battle for humanity's future was far from over.